Hello everyone, welcome to Conquer Learning. I'm Lakshmi Kushwaha. So from this video, we are going to start a series for Indian Constitution. If you're preparing for APFC, if you're preparing for ALC, this topic is really very important from exam point of view. So in this class, we are going to start from the history of Indian Constitution, how actually the British rule started in India, how legal history started in India, right? So, how first let's understand how East India Company came into India and how its establishment took place. So, it was year 1600. This is the year which is considered to be a year from when legal history started. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth gave or issued a royal charter of 1600 to form East India Company, and to East India Company an exclusive license was provided to trade in India. So basically the Britishers entered in India to trade, to do the business. So it was the exclusive license given by Queen Elizabeth to do the trade. They came to India. This East India Company, all the members of East India Company, they together formed the General Court. This General Court appointed a court of directors. This court of directors was responsible for managing the business of East India Company in India. Then the Charter 1600, which was provided by Queen Elizabeth, actually gave the legislative powers for 15 years to East India Company. But this legislative power were only for the governance of East India Company. So only for running and administrating the East India Company, this legislative power were given. Basis of this legislative power, the East India Company was authorized to make laws and punish for any kind of offense. By using same power which were given in the Charter 1600, East India Company also established the center at Madras and Surat. Then came Charter of 1661, where East India Company was reconstituted. This reconstitution was to give more legislative powers to East India Company. Here, governor and council were adopted. They were appointed. Governor was appointed for administration. They were authorized for both civil and criminal cases, and substantial legislative power for the territory in India. So, what's the difference here and here? Initially, when East India Company came up with the Charter of 1600, it was only regulating the East India Company. So, only for East India Company regulation and administration, the legislative power were given. However, by 1661, a territory was given. So, for certain territory, now other than East India, they were able to apply their legislative power in the given territory. Right? So, that was the difference between the Charter 1600 and 1661. Then Charter 1726. This was the year where three main presidency, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, they were formed and they were governed by Governor General and Council members. In this charter, uniform judiciary system was established. Uniform, similar, same everywhere. And this consists of mayor and 9 judges. Here in 1726, transfer of legislative power to the governor in council of each presidency from East India Company. So see, now the powers are slowly being transferred, slowly being you can say given to every presidency with an objective to have the control over the country. So initially it was the only East India Company regulating its own function. Legislative powers were given. 1616, then they were given certain territory. Then in 1726, the legislative powers were transferred to this governor, those governor general of Madras, Bombay and Calcutta. Okay. and each of the presidency from the East India Company. So this was initial charter. Now there were two basic battles or two important battles which actually resulted in the company rule or end of East India Company or bringing the Britishers to administer the East India Company. So the first battle was the Battle of Plassey. This was between East India Company headed by Robert Clive and Nawab of Bengal Siraj-ud-Dowla. This battle, the reason was there was an exchange, there was an you can say an agreement between both of them that Siraj-ud-Dowla would be providing in security against the external and internal attack, but this alliance was disrupted. As a result, there was a war. This war, because of an event called as Black Hole event, which happened in June 1976, there was a battle. However, East India Company won the battle and Clive became the first governor of the Bengal. So here also Suraj-ud-Dowla, who was the Nawab of Bengal, he was defeated. Then was Battle of Buxar. This is known as Diwani rights were given to East India Company, again won the battle and Diwani rights were given to them. Now what is Diwani rights? So it was Bengal, Orissa, Bihar. This is an right over revenue and civil justice. So rights providing right over the revenue being collected and the civil justice. This was given to the Bengal, Orissa, Bihar. Okay, to the East India Company. This region's Diwani rights were given to East India Company. Military defense and foreign affairs of Bengal were laid with the East India Company. So now military also and foreign affairs of Bengal were also under the East India Company. But these battles have made a huge loss for East India Company. They were not able to regulate their working. They were facing losses. They become bankrupt or they were into the position that they were not able to administer themselves. So as a result of this, the East India Company went to the British and they asked for the help. So Indian Constitution, which is having its originality from the British administration. Now, from here, from company rule, actually, the history of Indian Constitution started. So, if we have to study the history of Indian Constitution, chronologically, it can be divided into two parts. The company rule starting from 1773 in and to 1858 and the crown rule 1858 to 1947. In this video, we are going to cover only this company rule and in next video, we would be covering the crown rule. So let's understand what was this company rule. So company rule was or this rule came to India or Britishers actually came to India. British Parliament came to India to control East India or administer the East India Company. Since East India Company was not able to survive or not able to administer itself, so in order to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company in India, company rule was formed. This is also known as Regulating Act, East India Act and Charter Act. So the alternative names you need to remember. So this company rules actually started or had number of the Charter Act. Every 20 years new act or amendment act or new Charter Act was introduced. So let's start very first, that is your Regulating Act of 1773. So initially this was an initial step or the first step when the political and administrative functions of the East India Company were taken over by the Britishers. So British were brought, this act was brought by British Parliament to control the East India Company. They wanted to administer the East India Company under their control. The purpose of this regulating act was to remove the corruption. Why they were bankrupt? Why they were not able to survive? Because there were lot much of corruption. So in order to remove that corruption and to reform East India Company again, the Regulating Act of 1773 came into the existence. This regulating act is considered to be the foundation of central administration in India. What? It is the foundation of central administration in India. How? So, Governor of Bengal, he was named as Governor General of Bengal, or this position was actually called as Governor General of Bengal. And the first person was the person who was appointed as a Governor General of Bengal was Warren Hastings. Along with this Governor General, there was an four-member council who used to run the government. So, these four council members, for them, legislative work was secondary in nature. Here, the legislative work was primary. However, for council member, legislative work was secondary. This four council members, by another name or alternatively they are also called as Council of Four, Calcutta Council, or Governor General in Council, who was an executive, right? So now Bengal, Bihar, Orissa all came under its constitution. Whose? Governor General. They came into one constitution. What happened here is, this was, as I said, this is the foundation of bringing the centralization, first step of centralization. So this was where the Governor General of Bengal have to deal with the matters of war and peace, and Governor of Bombay and Governor General of Madras were kept under the Governor General of Bengal. So this is a centralization, giving or making the power centralized at one place. Then this is, here you need to remember that this is the first step towards the centralization. Again, the purpose of this regulating act was to establish the Supreme Court. As a result, in 1774, the first Supreme Court was established in Calcutta, and it consisted of the four judges, judicial power over the administration. The Court of Directors, which was a governing body of the company. Now, this Court of Directors were under the Britishers' control, and they were to report revenue, civil and military affairs. So everything need to be reported to the British government. So this is Regulating Act of 1773, which actually was introduced to bring the centralization. Then Amending Act of 1781, which is also called as Act of Settlement. This amendment was brought to in order remove the defects in earlier act. What happened? It exempted Governor General and Council from jurisdiction of the Supreme Court if they are functioning under their official area. So official work, official power, if they are working, then they were removed completely from the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. It empowered Governor General in Council to frame the regulations for the provisional courts and the council. This is Act of 1781. Then came Pitt's Act, India Act 1784. He was in PM of England. Now he came, this was the first time when it was declared land of India is in British possession. So first time being declared that India is an British possession. So this is our place. Britishers came, Pitt came and said this is our place and we are going to run. This particular act distinguished between the commercial and political functions of East India Company for the first time. Earlier, there was no such differentiation. There was only the legislative powers. This was for the first time when the commercial and political functions were distinguished. For that distinguishing those things, Court of Director, which was already a governing body of company, was given commercial powers, and new body was formed. This body was called as Board of Control, which was framed by British Parliament. There were 6 members in this Board of Control, and they had the political, administration and military affairs. They used to control all this. This too, introduction or division of commercial or political functions, is called as double government. So if you have the question in the exam, which year the double government was introduced or when the commercial and political functions were distributed, so it was 1784. Here the council members were reduced to 3. Earlier there were 4, now 3, and the Governor General was given the veto power. Clear? So 1784 was the year for the first time when it was commercial or the double government was introduced and British possession of India was declared. Now moving to the Act of 1786. Here Lord Cornwallis was adopted as Governor General of Bengal, and he kept two conditions to accept that position, that he should be given an overriding effect on the decision of council in the special cases. Means the council members, three members of council who are making the decision, if he is not okay with it, he can override, his decision will be overriding, and he would be a commander in chief. Then came Charter Act of 1793. This continued the overriding decision of councils to the further governor generals and the governor presidencies. तो इसको carry forward किया गया. But okay, so this was carry forward, and more power and control over the government or subordinate presidency of Bombay and Madras. So they were now controlled more. So Bengal governor started having more control over Bombay and Madras. Another point, the trade monopoly of East India Company. So East India Company again was given a monopoly to trade in India for another 20 years. However, the commander-in-chief, who was introduced in 1786, he won't be a member of Governor General Council unless appointed. So he can be a member, but until unless he is not appointed, he won't be. Board of Control. So this is your British Parliament, right? Double government introduced this Board of Control, and their staff to be paid from the Indian revenues. So now they started being paid from the Indian revenues only. Then came Charter Act of 1830. This was the year when it abolished the trade monopoly of East India Company, and British merchants were given an open. So trade was open to them, that now you also can come and trade in India. However, the monopoly for tea and trade remained with China. This charter asserted the sovereignty of British crown over the company's territory. Means the British crown, the British queen, the British government is having complete sovereignty, complete control over the company's territories. This allowed Christian missionaries to come India and preach Western education. Local government were given an right, or they can impose the tax. So this is 1831. In 1831, what you have to remember is that it abolished the trade monopoly. Then came Charter Act of 1833, which is considered to be the final step of centralization. Here, Governor General of Bengal was named as Governor General of India, giving all civil and military powers to Governor General of India. The first person was William Bentinck. He was given the legislative powers of Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras were taken away. So they were now no more having any legislative power. They were only in a case of administrative. So all the legislative powers were given to Governor General of India, and this too, Bombay and Madras were under the control of Governor General of India. So Governor General of India had full legislative power for the British India. So since India was under the control of British, so it was called as British India. East India Company, complete administrative and the political powers were taken up, and it was ended only as a commercial company which was only dealing with the administrative. So political and legislative power were completely taken up. 1833 was the year when open competition of selection of civil servants, usually basically for Indians, this was open, but this was later on negated as opposition of court of director, that no, we don't want any Indians to be the part of the offices. Then came Charter Act of 1853. This was the last act in the series. This law actually separated for the first time legislative and executive functions of Governor General of Council. And in the Legislative Council, there were 6 members, and in the 6 members, it was named as Indian or the Central Legislative Council, which was acting as a mini parliament. So here giving more of Indian, like making it as more Indian, right? So making it as naming it as Indian Legislative Council, acting as mini parliament. Separate governor for the Bengal presidency was introduced. Open competition of selection and recruitment of civil servants were opened for the Indians. So Maclew Committee was formed for the first time here through this charter, 1854. This was the Committee on Indian Civil Services. This is really very important from exam point of view. It extended the company rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territories on the trust of British Crown. So company, East India Company was allowed to retain the possession on Indian territories. Indian territories were under the control of the company till now, but under the trust, means everything would be going according to the British government. This was the first time when the local representation of Indians happened. So in Indian Central Legislative Council, out of 6, 4 members were appointed by the local provisional government of Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. Right? So this is complete company rule till the last Charter Act of 1853. In next class, we would be actually starting the Crown Rule, right? So Crown Rule is the rule where actually from 1858 in 1857 the first revolt or the first war of independence happened. So this we would be doing in our next session. If you have liked, if you have understood, do like, share and subscribe to the session. Any comment, any question you can ask in the comment section.